The agenda for today is as follows. We're going to watch a 5-minute movie excerpt of Gary Cohen's documentary, Magic on Music Mountain. So we're going to do that shortly. Then John Case is going to discuss the Music Circus and St. John Terrell, and he's going to show us photos and talk about um, uh, the various resources on his amazing website, which is lambertville-music-circus.org. So that'll be a presentation. We're going to do a little Q&A then after that, questions and answers, questions for John and Gary, and we'll take those, and I'll moderate that with you all. And then after that, we want to open it up, and any reminiscences that you have or items that you might want to show, like Patricia did just before, holding up a flyer or a playbill or something that she had. But we'll do that. And so that's the agenda. And on that note, I'm going to stop yapping, and we're going to play the 5-minute video, and then we'll get into the presentation.
I believe that St. John could sell ice to Eskimos. He knew how to get people excited. He really did give them value for their money because he always gave them something more than they expected, bigger than life. The original site was magical. It was placed right in a neighborhood. The tent itself in the theater held, I believe, 1,500 people. And it was in the round, even though it was an oval, because it was under a two-pole circus tent. I started working at the Music Circus when I was 15 in 1960. I got hired as a staff artist, and my duties basically were to paint signs, but the fact that it gave me access to the shows in the evening was all I really, really cared about. And then the following year, I came back and got a job working in the scene shop. And there was a period where I was a scene boy, where we would run the sets up and down the aisles. And then I also got to know the business end of it by working in the box office.
Most of the chairs were canvas captain's chairs, but in the back there were rows of metal folding chairs. And those metal folding chairs, depending upon what night it was, if it was a weeknight, I think they sold for like $1.75. And the main down in the front row on the most expensive night, I think was no more than $4.75.
South Pacific played there 4 times, and I was there for 2 of the productions. And one of them, James Michener, who wrote Tales of the South Pacific, on which South Pacific is based, lived in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, just across the river. And he played the professor in South Pacific at the Music Circus in one of the productions.
Larry Hagman was there in South Pacific. Shirley MacLaine danced in the chorus as Shirley Beatty. Gwyneth Paltrow's uncle Harry Danner was in the chorus there one summer as well.
Some of the famous people who came out of the Music Circus, in other words, they weren't famous when they played at the Music Circus, but they went on to big careers. Robert Goulet was a singer. Bernadette Peters still is on Broadway. Bea Arthur started out at the Music Circus. She was in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. As the musicals fell out of favor, St. John decided that he'd better update some of his acts, and he started to bring in rock groups and contemporary groups. Any group in the 60s and 70s that was on the top of the charts probably played at the Music Circus.
One time, Frankie Valli was doing his laundry. He had his laundry done, sent out from the hotel. I think he was staying at the Lambertville house, I'm not sure. And he sent his laundry out to get done. Somebody said, I just did Frankie Valli's laundry. And I thought that was the coolest thing.
The stage would revolve, and it revolved super duper slowly, so slow that you wouldn't even notice it. I mean, this thing was revolving so slow. So what happened is we're playing on the revolving stage, we're doing our show, and we didn't even forgot about the fact that it revolves. They told us that, but you know, you're looking down, you're playing, you look up, all of a sudden the audience is different now. That's a little bit of a head trip there, because you know, I don't know if we were doing any stuff at that time but that's a head trip in itself when you get up and the whole audience that you just looked at is over there, and there's another, and then you start saying, is it me? What's going on? You know.
I decided to create the Music Circus website that I now host in 2005. I was talking to some friends and telling them stories about the Music Circus and what a magical time it was, and realized that apparently there's no record of this. There was no website at the time. So I decided to start the website so that there would be a record that the Music Circus actually existed.
Okay, I was sorry about that initial mess up there, but were you able to hear John Woods? Were you able to hear it eventually? Okay, thank you. And thank you, by the way, for saying I can't hear, because I could hear it and I didn't realize it wasn't going. So a little bit about that. So that short movie was an excerpt from Gary Cohen's 2014 documentary, Magic on Music Mountain, the story of the Lambertville Music Circus. Gary also made a documentary about Lambertville in 2011 called Halloweenville. For the Lambertville Historical Society, he last year produced our virtual house tour. And if you want to watch a few of the house video tours, they're on our website. Just go to lambertvillehistoricalsociety.org, and he and I work together on those. There are 4 of those. Wonderful. Gary had worked in the New Jersey theater scene for more than 40 years. He co-founded Celebration Playhouse in Cranford, one of the best independent New Jersey theaters, and for Middlesex County's Plays in the Park, Gary was the producing director for 30 years. Now, for the presentation, John Case grew up in Lambertville on Canal Street. For 4 years, 1960 to 1964, he worked at the Lambertville Music Circus. He acted in small roles and sang in the chorus, and mainly worked backstage and in the box office. And as you heard him say in that video, he wanted to, years later, preserve and share the history of the magical venue and its impresario, St. John Terrell. And in 2005, he created that remarkable website, lambertville-music-circus.org, using the knowledge and resources he had and reaching out to visitors for more information. John moved out of the area in 1995 and now lives in St. Louis. So you can take the boy out of Lambertville and you can bring him back here on Zoom. And that's what we've done today. So here he is to tell us about St. John Terrell's Music Circus. And I'm going to share the screen. Welcome, John.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Welcome. Nice to see you all. As Mike said, my name is John Case. I grew up on Canal Street in South Lambertville. My first exposure to the music circus was when I was about 8 years old. My father, who had a woodworking shop, was building the sets for the music circus. Jim Hamilton, who I'm sure a lot of you know from Hamilton's Grill on Coryell Street, designed the sets, and my father built them. And as a young kid, I was absolutely fascinated by the magic and the imagination of building sets. I remember that he built a tree for Finian's Rainbow, and the tree was attached to one of the main poles of the tent, and it reached all the way up into the light rigging so that the leprechaun in Finian's Rainbow could climb up the tree and sit there and spy on the other characters. He also built a stove for Plain and Fancy that exploded. It was part of the story, and it had a secret pedal under the stove that the actor would step on, and inside the stove was a fire extinguisher, and all of the discharge from the extinguisher would fly out through the pot. And all of this, to a young kid was absolutely magical. The other thing was that because he built the sets, he got free tickets. So our family could go and see the shows at the music circus. Then when I was 15 and wanted a summer job, I applied for a summer job, and they had an opening for an artist. I wasn't really an artist, but they hired me anyway. And in 1960, at the end of the season, they produced Sunrise at Campobello, and they needed some kids to play. Gary, you can move to the next slide, I guess. Mike. Yeah. So they needed a couple of kids to play FDR's children. So I got to experience my first acting job on stage at the music circus. And from there, I went to the work in the scene shop, which was extremely educational and a lot of fun. I got to run scenery. Any of you who were lucky enough to be at the music circus remember when the lights would go out between scenes, there was a flurry of activity as teenagers like me, dressed in black, would run down the aisles carrying scenery to set up and remove the scenery from the previous scene. And we had to do this all within a minute or even less. And then the last few years I was at the music circus, I worked in the box office. So we can go on to the next. This is St. John Terrell. This is at the old theater location up on Music Mountain. This is probably taken in the 50s. St. John Terrell was an amazing man. He was an impresario. He was a huckster. He had incredible imagination. He had a magnetic personality. He was born in Chicago in 1916. His name was George Eccles, but he quickly changed that to St. John Terrell and ran away with the circus when he was 16. And he became a barker and he became a fire eater. And then he moved to Chicago, where he had a few small roles in theater and eventually became radio's first Jack Armstrong All-American Boy. Then he moved to New York and got minor roles in Broadway shows and went to Columbia University, where he studied business. Then along came World War II. he became a pilot in the Army Air Force and flew quite a few missions. And somehow, I'm not sure how, somehow he got injured. And so rather than leave the Army, he was assigned to the USO and was in charge of the shows where where they would entertain the troops. This is where he got his original idea for the music circus. He was very unhappy when the touring shows would come through, with people like Bob Hope, and the soldiers in the front couple of rows got really good seats, but sometimes there were thousands of soldiers, and they were way in the back, and they couldn't see or even hear what was going on stage. So he commandeered a couple of bulldozers and dug out a big hole, a big bowl, and put the stage in the center. Now, that's not original. Theater in the Round has been around for centuries, but it was unique to this situation, to the Army. And so the soldiers got a closer view of what was going on. After World War II, somehow he ended up in the Delaware Valley. I'm not sure why or how, but he got together with several other people, theater people in the area. Moss Hart was one, and there were a number of other people. Of course, a lot of you know probably that Doylestown was the center of a lot of theatrical people, Oscar Hammerstein II, and writers like Dorothy Parker. So they bought the old grist mill that's now the Bucks County Playhouse, converted it into a theater, and they were able to get investors. And so from that was in 1939, before he went in the Army. I'm sorry, I apologize. So the World War II interrupted his theater career. But after the war was over and he was still operating the Playhouse, he became dissatisfied that he had to share authority and ideas with a bunch of investors that he didn't always agree with. So he decided to open up his own theater, and that's when he took his idea of cutting out a bowl in the dirt and putting a tent over it in Lambertville, and called it the Lambertville Music Circus. The first show was Naughty Marietta in 1949 July. So if you'd move to the next slide. There's St. John with an actor, Richard Bennett, in 1939 when the Playhouse was first opened. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the photo on the right. It looks pretty much the same as it did way back then. One of the problems was that it had such a small audience. It's only, I don't know, 350 seats. So through its entire existence, it's always had trouble earning enough money to be a successful theater. It has struggled, and it has got help from Pennsylvania after it was named the State Theater. Let's move on to the next image. So here's a plot plan that I found online at the Wisconsin History website. Somehow they got a hold of this. This was a survey and a plot plan done by Frank Bourne of the original tent. And you can see at the top there's the driveway that came in off of old Route 202 when 179 was 202. And you can see the oval circus tent, the stage in the center, the aisles that go down to the stage. And on the right-hand side was the main entrance, flanked by the box office and the business office, and a refreshment stand. And in the back, that large rectangle was the dressing rooms, and behind that, a tiny little scene shop that they outgrew very quickly. The next slide. This is what it looked like from the front. There's the main entrance, and the as a kid, again, I thought this was incredibly creative. Those are not real wheels, but he just took regular box offices and made them look like circus wagons. Let's see where we're going to go from here. And the next slide, yeah. So there's a picture of St. John doing a demonstration of fire eating out in front of the theater during an intermission. And then on the right side, a picture of him addressing the audience. Before every show, he would take 5 or 10 minutes and talk to the audience and tell them what shows were coming up that year, and also regale them with stories of his career. He wasn't bound by the truth. He would, like most show people, he exaggerated when it was necessary to make his story better. And I've talked to him once about how he was able to draw statistics out of the air. You know, that 62% of our audiences last year came from the suburbs of Philadelphia. And I said, how do you know stuff like that? And he said, I don't, I just make it up, and people believe it. So this is the inside of the original tent on the left. And you can see that there are quarter poles. There's the 2 main poles, but then there's a bunch of little tiny poles that anchor in the audience. And this always bothered St. John. He made quite a few innovations to summer theater tents during his career. And the first one was to get rid of those quarter poles. And he invented the type of umbrella poles that you see on the right. So instead of the poles going from the tent down to the ground in the audience, they were like the stays of an umbrella, and they went to the 2 main poles. So that at eye level, the complete theater was within view. No one had to sit behind a pole. Also, you notice on the left-hand side, the lighting is very elementary. It's just a few lights attached to the 2 main poles. And of course, this was quite inadequate to put on a really good production. So he invented this light ring that was on a series of ropes and pulleys, and that would be assembled on the stage at the beginning of the season. All the lights would be attached, and then they would raise it up over the audience so that they could put as many lights as they needed, and they used it for microphones. And as you can see, there is a performance going on in a crowded house. The theater held 1,500 people. So as opposed to the Playhouse, which could only hold a couple of hundred people, he was able to make enough money to bring in many more people and put on more elaborate shows than they could at the Playhouse. The next slide is so this is opening night. There actually is a picture of opening night. Susanna Foster, who was well known at the time, in The Merry Widow. I'm sorry, I said Naughty Marietta, but no, it was The Merry Widow. When the Music Circus first opened, they mostly did operettas. One reason was that they were very inexpensive to rent. The royalties were very low, and so that kept the production cost down. Also, because it was a new theater and it was an unproven idea, the publishers of current and newly produced Broadway shows were reluctant to allow him to produce their shows. But after a couple of seasons, he showed how successful he could be. In the beginning, the newspapers from New York down to Philadelphia were very skeptical about this new project. But after a couple of seasons, all of the major newspapers in the area would send reviewers on opening night and write articles, reviews about the show. And so by the time the mid-50s came along, he was able to get the rights to Broadway shows that had just recently closed, maybe the season before, shows like Pajama Game, etc. This is believed to be a float that was in the bicentennial, or the centennial rather, of Lambertville. St. John and the Music Circus had a on and off relationship with Lambertville. A lot of people were very proud that the Music Circus was in town, and that it drew some famous people. But other people complained about the traffic. When a show would close and everyone would drive down Old 202 onto Bridge Street to cross the bridge to go back to Philadelphia, there would be a traffic jam from traffic light to traffic light. And so people complained about this, and there was talk in the 50s and the 60s of imposing an entertainment tax in Lambertville, just to tax the music circus, sort of as a penalty for disrupting the peacefulness of Lambertville. And they also, a lot of people said, what does the music circus bring to Lambertville? It doesn't bring any money in. People leave the show and immediately go home. They don't stay and spend the money. So St. John Terrell told his treasurer, for the next few weeks, I want you to pay all of the actors and all the actresses and all the backstage people in silver dollars. And the treasurer did that. And within a couple of weeks, everyone in Lambertville was talking about all these silver dollars. Where are all these silver dollars coming from? And that sort of put a kibosh then on the idea that the music circus wasn't financially positive for the town. In 1953, so the music circus has only been open for 4 years. But St. John was realizing that during the winter, after the season was over, people would forget about the music circus. And in the spring, he'd have to spend a lot of money on promotion to get people interested again in the music circus. And he had come up with this idea years before, but had done nothing about it. And his press agent in New York, Max Eisen, said, St. John, that idea you have about crossing the Delaware is a very good idea. It's right in the middle of winter. You'll get tons of publicity, and it'll help the music circus. So again, he turned to my father, who before World War II had been a boat builder, and asked Elmer to build a boat which is half scale of the original Durham boat that Washington used. So my father built it, and he was one of the people for the first couple of years that crossed Christmas Day in the morning from Washington's Crossing across to New Jersey. So the music circus was located in 2 places in Lambertville. The first one, 1949 to 1961, on what's called Music Mountain now, and I'm pretty sure St. John is the one that got people to use that name. It was originally called Woodward Mountain. And I have a feeling that St. John was able to get people to rename it Music Mountain. And then in '62, because he had outgrown that space, it was so tight, there was very little parking. He bought a farm up the road a little bit on what is now 179 and built the new music circus. There you can see on the left is the new tent, and that A-frame in the front was the business office, and the smaller building on the right there is the box office. Again, he was innovative. He had a chance here to make improvements to the theater. On the right side, you can see that they're setting up for the season, and they put all the chairs out, except they haven't put the canvas backs on yet. And you can see the light ring there sitting on the stage, ready to be hoisted into place. And if you look just beyond the light ring framing, you can see a dark spot. And that was a tunnel that went underneath the audience, so that people, the actors and actresses, could move directly from the dressing rooms out back under the audience and magically appear on stage without having to run up and down the aisles. So this is a list. I'll give you a minute to go through these. This is a list of some of the actors and actresses that appeared at the Music Circus that some of you may know. B. Arthur has already been mentioned. Bert Lahr, Sylvia Sidney. If you're a real old 1930s film buff, you'll know that name. Ellen Travolta, John Travolta's sister. Larry Kurt, he starred in the original Broadway version of West Side Story. Dom DeLuise, I'm sure all of you know Dom DeLuise. Bernadette Peters was also mentioned before. These are people that he discovered during auditions in New York. In the winter, when the theater was closed, St. John and the business manager and the treasurer would plan out the next season, and they'd go to New York and have open auditions once they knew the roles they needed to fill. And St. John was a big believer in supporting very talented, unknown people. And I think he was pretty successful at that. And in the early '60s, I believe it started. Monday nights, the theater was dark. There was no show on Monday nights, just like on Broadway. And St. John decided he wanted to run the theater 7 nights a week. So he decided to engage concert performers. Originally, it was called Jazz Night. It was just jazz. But then later, he got people like Judy Collins and Buffy St. Marie. And that was so successful that he decided to have Sunday concerts. And that was more folk music. You could Phil Oakes, let's see, Peter, Paul, and Mary. Let's see who else you might know. I guess Simon and Garfunkel. Liberace was always a big hit at the Music Circus. Whenever Liberace appeared sometime during the season, St. John always brought him back at the end of the season after Labor Day, and it was sold out all the time. Here's a later picture of St. John standing on the balcony of that A-frame. uh, office, probably taking somewhere around 1963. So as the 60s moved on, the taste of the American theater people changed, and the audience grew smaller, and television probably played a role in it, and it was more difficult to fill the theater with an audience, and so revenues came down, and so St. John started to get a little tight on spending on productions, and that, of course, then led to a vicious circle. People started to realize the productions weren't as grand or as successful, and so fewer and fewer people came. He started to book touring companies, so he didn't have a resident company. And finally, in 1970, the theater closed. St. John lived at Northridge in Stockton, New Jersey, which is now called the Wolverton. He lived there during the 50s and 60s. After the theater closed, he had remarried again and had 2 daughters, and he moved to Ewing Township between Lambertville and Trenton. And he continued mostly with his plans for crossing the organizing the crossing of the Delaware. He was the founding member of the New Jersey State Council on the Arts. He was a charter member of the Board of Trustees of the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress, and he was chairman of the New Jersey Tercentenary celebration. As it was explained by Mike before, in 2005, I realized that there was no website, and this history was being lost. So I started the website and put out a call to anyone who had any information, any printed material, any stories. Please send them to me, and I'll put them on the website. And I must say, in the last 15 years, it has fleshed out very, very nicely. But there's still some gaps. Mostly playbills. I've been trying to get a copy of a playbill from every show. So if any of you have any information or printed material, you can contact me at the website. There's a link to my email address at the bottom. And we can arrange somehow to get it to me so I can scan it or you can scan it, and we can flesh out this site a little bit more. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, John. I hope everybody enjoyed that out there. Thank you. I'm gonna ask you all to mute yourselves again because we're getting a little bit of feedback. So if you're not on mute, please press mute. I'm gonna try to. I see someone. Okay. So John, just absolutely wonderful. You talked a little bit about putting the word out in 2005 to research. Was it just simple, like, is that contacting your friends and neighbors? How did you, this is before the internet was a bit really, easy to use and commonplace, and before iPhones for that matter. How did you gather all these photos and what have you?
2 people that I contacted were Kenny Sheets in Lambertville and Mort Mather, who was in Gary's video. And they had kept contact with many more people than I had who worked at the music circus. So it snowballed. And then as more people went to the site, and I could see that many people probably had the same conversations that I had with their friends. somehow the subject of the music circus would come up. And because Google was now where you went to find whatever you wanted to find, they would Google Lambertville Music Circus, and my site would come up, and then they would contact me and say they had this or they had that, and over the years it grew and grew.
Yeah, it's a one. If you haven't had a chance, folks, to look to scroll through the website, it's just wonderful to read reminiscences by Sharon DeSalvi talking about wearing a chick costume and delivering a chicken dinner to Louis Armstrong. Um, things like that. Just wonderful stories. But then John also supplements that with you realize what a groundbreaking venue this was through the articles that he links to. Um, I'm going to do a quick poll. I created this. Let's see. You're going to see on the bottom of your screen just one question. I just wanted to see who out there had actually worked or attended events at the music circus, and you'll see the results very quickly. And while this poll is running, Gary Cohen, I have a question for you. So when you made this your video documentary, how did you? There was no Zoom then. How do you get the videos, these interviews remotely with folks who are dispersed all over the place?
Just before I answer that, I just want to give credit to my partners on both Halloweenville and Magic on Music Mountain, which is Paul Kay and Michelle Massa and Jan Niskern. So we all made it together.
Okay.
We also, when we got the idea for the project, sent out a need for people to tell us if you would like to be a part of it. John provided a lot of names, and initially it was a little frustrating. We found that a lot of people had just recently passed on that we tried to contact. So we were our timing was on one hand good. There were plenty of people left, and not so good. Wish we had done it a couple of years earlier. But in the case of John, in the case of Mort Mather, in the case of Gerald Crone, we created a series of questions, and again, pre-Zoom, and asked those gentlemen to have a friend videotape them looking at the camera as though they were looking at me asking the questions. And that worked out very, very well. It sort of is seamless, I think, in the documentary, that you can't tell who we're really there with in Lambertville or New York City, and who is really phoning this in from quite a distance all over the United States. We had a similar thing with Steve Jarrell, who was a DJ and was very much involved in the rock and roll contest with Cousin Brucey. He submitted an audio tape to us of his interview, along with some 8mm movie film that we were able to use. And Joyce Randolph, Trixie from the Honeymooners, I interviewed her over the phone and recorded it while she was talking. So it's a combination of people long distance and people who we actually could go with microphones in our cameras.
Wonderful. The whole documentary will be available on our website. Gary has actually donated it, the digital version, to us, and we put it on YouTube. I want to read it on the chat. Dennis Hart writes, "My mother and brother and I are watching. Our father built our house in 1955, 2 houses from the music circus. My mother attended most of the shows and remembers Liberace coming over to watch our father build a house, as well as other stories such as when the ice capades dried up all of the wells in the area." Thank you. That's a wonderful one. Does anybody, so because there's so many people, does anyone have a question for John before we get into reminiscences? Does anyone have a question for John or Gary? And we could do those first, and then we could jump into your memories. And
I would just like to mention one thing,
yes, go ahead,
and
Gary.
Admitting something. The footage that I have in the documentary of setting up the tent is not actually the music circus. It was a subsequent music circus run by somebody else, but I found that on their website, and since it was so similar, they gave us permission to use it. And the other fascinating part of the documentary is there is some actual footage of the music circus, not just pictures. And the way that came about, I don't know all the details. Apparently, a comic short was made in the early years of the music circus about two house painters who were called in to paint the dressing room. And I guess it was a little bit off color. They were sneaking looks at the actresses getting dressed while they were painting the dressing room. I have no idea why this was made, but fortunately, it showed some actual scenes on film of the music circus, and we were able to get that footage and incorporate it.
Question for John and for Gary. Did you speak with St. John's son Bart while researching the music circus?
I did via email, but it was after the fact.
John?
No, I wasn't able to contact Bart. I understand he lives in Palm Beach, Florida now. But I was able to talk to one of St. John's daughters who lives in Denver. And she didn't have much information because she said she was very, very young when the music circus closed. St. John has another daughter who lives in London who I wasn't able to contact.
Okay. John, you referenced it earlier, but someone asked, they may not have caught it. St. John was not his real name. What was his birth name?
George Eccles.
George Eccles. Now,
And
on the subject of his name, here's the funny thing. In his later life, he decided to, his new project was he was going to rehabilitate the image of Richard III, the old English monarch. And the tie, he had a personal tie to this project. He said he descended from an assassin that murdered Richard III's nephews on orders. St. John thought that was a bad rap all around. And this is in his obituary in the New York Times. But the name was, that assassin's name was Tyrell, I believe. And so my thought when reading that is, but wait a minute, how is his name is George Eccles? How is he related? That St. John Tyrell is a stage name. How is the name related to an assassin from the 1400s? John,
and there you have the story. And there you have the story of St. John. And of course, St. John is short for Saint John. You know, when it was written out, whenever his name was written out, it's Saint John Tyrell. But the English shortened St. John to St. John.
Someone has asked, please explain again where in today's terms the location of the theaters was. I mean, so we could kind of do that if you're driving up Main Street and you're going to make a right turn past the fire department to go up the hill.
Past Phillips Barber.
Past Phillips Barber. So the neighborhood to the right is where the which, as John said, is that area St. John called Music Mountain, rightfully. And before that, what you said was Woodward Hill? Is that what you said, John?
Woodward Mountain.
Woodward Mountain. But so Jean Street, you know, that's the first location. and then the second location obviously is the Music Mountain development up at the top. You drive up to 179 and make a left, and all the streets there are named, in honor of Music Mountain. There's Terrell Boulevard and Music Mountain Boulevard and so on.
Well, that's the second location.
That's the second, right? The second location.
The first location is on on the hill, I believe, above Ely Hill, Ely Field. And I see the hearts are here. They would better be able to describe. But the way I used to go when the music circle was running was go up what is 179 now, and make a left onto what we used to call the cow path across from the old Buddy Williams, and follow that to the little neighborhood up on the hill there. Is that correct, Mr. Hart?
Yeah, that's correct. If you go down that road, when you come to a point where you have to go around a sharp right turn, that's the Music Circus with straight ahead. Your view right there.
Yeah,
we're still sitting in that same house, 2 houses away.
Mary Voorhees, I saw. Were you raising your hand? Did you want to say something about the location? I'm going to unmute. I couldn't tell. You can unmute yourself.
Go ahead. Yeah. No, I just wanted to say I was one of the usherettes. And I remember, running up and down the aisles and dusting off the canvas seats, and always enjoyed all the shows. They were great. So, and Bo and Stan, who was across the street, I guess the street, and going over there. And my brother, Frank, he worked in there for a while. And it was a good, fun time. So that's about all I have to say. I really enjoyed the program. It's great.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, someone has asked, and I think I know the answer, but John is going to answer. Wasn't there a restaurant on the site in the last few years? What was the name? Can't remember. Someone wrote in the chat.
Barnum's. It was called Barnum's, and then the Yellow Brick Toad.
The Yellow Brick Toad. And what kind of food did they serve?
I only ate there once, and it seemed like it was mostly diner type food, hamburgers, French fries, etc.
So, and what was the place when Sharon DeSalvi talked about serving chicken dinners to Louis Armstrong and folks? What was the place that do you know in Lambertville that was making these chicken dinners? Does anybody know the answer to that? Who was making so she had to wear she in her story, which is posted on John's website and on ours, they had to wear these she and several other girls had to wear chick outfits. If anybody knows what restaurant that was.
If I'm not mistaken,
go ahead.
I think it's that restaurant right across the street from the new site that has gone through any number of changes lately, and I don't even know if it's open now. In the last couple of years, they assumed the same name of what it was back during the Music Circus. And I'm old, and I don't remember what that name was. But whatever that name was, they tried to start it again, and I think that's where all the chicken came from.
Patricia Hatton, I see you nodding your head. Can you unmute yourself and enlighten us?
If you went down
Buddies.
the hill into the Lambertville itself, on the left, there was a restaurant that had sort of a triangular roof to it. It was in existence for many, many years after the Music Circus closed. I was an usher at the Music Circus in 1969 and a couple of years prior to that. My family lived in Ringo's, and a lot of us who were teenagers in college and high school worked at the Music Circus as ushers.
Yeah.
Buddies is the name of the place I was trying to think of.
Yeah.
Buddies.
Yep. So, by the way, someone writes in the chat, we had our wedding reception at the Yellow Brick Toad.
Oh.
That must have been a nice party. Someone writes, the original site was for a smaller audience. What was the maximum seating capacity of the second site up in West Amwell? John, do you know what the second location?
I believe it went up to 2,100.
Well,
but I'm not sure.
Okay, I'm reading. Okay, they're talking about Buddies. Yep, Buddies. Everybody. Buddies was the chicken place.
Yeah.
Buddy Williams.
Buddy Williams,
Buddy
yeah.
Williams. Okay.
Yep.
Anybody else have a question before for John? Or I guess we could just zip into if you want to share a story as well. We'd love to hear it. The way to do that would be either, if I can't see everybody, you can either just raise your hand, or you could in the chat say question.
Can I relate a story?
Yes, but you can. And hold on a sec. I'm gonna show you the. Can you see the results of that poll that we did earlier? So 28 people on this meeting worked at or attended events. Okay, go ahead, Gary.
One of my favorite parts about making the documentary was going to New York to his penthouse.
Actually, Gary, hold on one sec. I have to mute everybody because we're getting feedback here. And then we're gonna. How can I do that? I'm going to ask you all to mute yourselves again. Okay, go ahead, Gary.
One of the most fascinating parts of the documentary to film for us was Dick Button's townhouse in New York. He is the world-renowned ice skater, and he was approached to do a new version of On the Town and two other shows where they actually filled the orchestra pit with water and froze it and allowed him to ice skate in the music circus. And he was quite proud of that. And he was also quite thankful to St. John for having an open mind and allowing something like that to happen. And then I'll just say one more. I see that Florence Moonen is here listening.
Yes.
And she had done a number, she's in the documentary, and she did a number of paintings that were about the music circus. And while that is not part of the actual documentary proper, on the DVD, there's an extra video that shows all her paintings. And I'll get that to you to put up on the site as well, Mike.
Oh, wonderful.
Can I, Mike? This
Yes.
is Florence Moonen. I can't see myself, and I don't know how to do it. I'm black.
Video, lower left.
In the bottom left, you'll
Lower
see
left.
a little camera, and if
Start
you click
video.
it, say start video.
I wondered where you
There-
were.
there-
Yeah. Okay, great. I just have a few anecdotes, and I want to thank Gary for the interview with my paintings and everything. That was a lot of fun. But I do have some short anecdotes about some of my remembrances from my days from 1951 to, it was 54, 55, and Local Children performed at the circus, and I was fortunately one. But a lot of the corps de ballet and the chorus lived in houses throughout the town, and they also stayed at the Lambertville House. And my sister Joyce and I used to go down to see Marilyn Greenman at the Lambertville House, and she would teach us ballet. So that was fun. The cast members were always marvelous. And then I remember Mrs. Teresco, she did costumes. I think she lived on Main Street in Lambertville. She was the dressmaker. I can remember her in the dressing room stitching things up that got torn in at the last minute. And so I remember that. And there was one evening when one of the dancers fell into the orchestra pit. There was a deep pit, and the orchestra performed there, and this is the original tent, and she was dancing on top of a drum or something, and she fell into the pit. So that was pretty horrifying. She wasn't seriously injured. And there was, oh, whenever there was a thunderstorm, oh my God, that was terrible. I mean, I can remember Showboat was showing, and someone was singing. I don't know the singer's name, but she was singing that beautiful song about her man, and this thunderstorm started, and the pounding rain on the tent just made it impossible for you to hear anything. So that was a problem for being under the tent. And well, Gary mentioned my series of paintings. I'm still inspired by the music circus and my days there. I have some playbills, John, that you might not have. I'll see if I can get them to you. My photographs, good photographs, I've given to Gary, and I think they've been incorporated in the documentary. So I think that's it.
Okay, Florence, yeah, just send me an email through the website, and just give me the shows and the years,
Sure.
and I'll let you know if I'm missing those. Thank you.
I'll mention one. They performed. Showboat was performed at the Arena in Philadelphia on August the 12th, 1953, and I went down and performed the role of Kim for that event. And this is just, well, the cover. I don't know if I think I might have more of it somewhere.
Well, wonderful.
But yeah,
wonderful.
So that was exciting.
Okay.
Florence, how many paintings have you made that were inspired by the music circus?
God, well, I have 5 large paintings, and I've made a series on wood, and I have about a dozen of those, and I did other. Well, opera also is a favorite of mine, and I've done a lot of work about opera. But the one about St. John Terrell is an homage to St. John Terrell, and the canvas is red to represent the canvas of the tent, and then there's ropes are hanging to represent the ropes of the tent, and that's the stage. Oh, I know, I can't remember. Oh, there's glitter in there. There's sawdust in there. They're mixed media paintings. So I still have them in my inventory. So yeah.
Wonderful.
So Mike,
yes.
Florence mentioned thunderstorms. That was always a big problem at the music circus. It was on top of the hill. It was very vulnerable, and you know how quickly thunderstorms come across the Delaware River into Lambertville. And there was one evening where St. John had given his pre-show chat to the audience, and the wind started to pick up, and the scene boys were responsible for taking care of the flaps. You would always put the flaps down on the wind side and open them on the leeward side so that the pressure wouldn't build up inside the tent. But this one particular storm was so strong that the tent started to raise because there was so much heat inside because it had been such a hot, probably August day. And St. John, in his double-breasted suit, climbed up on the tent and crawled up one of the ribs up to the top where the two main poles project through the tent. And there are flaps over those holes. And he removed the flaps to allow the hot air that had gathered inside the tent to escape. And it shows what a hands-on owner and manager he was. He really did care about the tent and the circus and the audience, and was willing to risk his life because he was on top of that tent as the storm was blowing across.
Amazing. Someone says, John, that you got to add Country Joe and the Fish to the performers list because Carol Rumpf has said that she saw them there. So we'll make a note of that. Someone says, I saw Vanilla. oh, let me get back here. Oh, who starred in Showboat? Someone asked that question. Who starred in Showboat? Does anybody recall?
Well, I have the playbill somewhere, but I can't recall them right. There have been so many different productions. The early productions, I can't recall.
Okay.
Okay, but I could find out.
Someone says, I'm so glad Gary, you interviewed the Vanilla Fudge. Let me get back to that. Here it is. It was the loudest show I have ever experienced. The best.
It was interesting. Vince arranged for us to interview him at a radio station. And I had no idea he was going to perform for us. And one of his songs is included in the documentary. And we've sort of remained friends since then. He's no longer loud. He does acoustic stuff now, and he's really quite a great guitar player.
Somebody writes, the Friends of Washington Crossing recently posted an article about a photo circa 1953 by Harry Geyer of the first St. John Terrell crossing of the Delaware, and it was in a rowboat, and there's a link in the chat. So if you want to, we'll save that somewhere as well, but in case you want to look at it right now.
I recall the name of Evelyn Wyckoff had the lead in the 1951 production of Showboat. I don't know where her career went, but that was her name, Evelyn Wyckoff.
Anybody else have a memory of working? Do you recall what you were paid as an usher? Or you weren't? From what I hear, the pay wasn't so hot. It was more the experience of working there in the summer. Anybody remember what your compensation was?
Bunny Schultz says in the documentary that she was paid $1 or so, but mostly she got the orange drinks. Okay. She was paid in orange drinks.
Anybody else have a memory or anecdote to share, or a question for John or Gary?
I can remember the St. John Terrell sat next to me one day in the tent. We were having a rehearsal, and of course I was dying to be in the theater, and he sat next to me and asked me what I wanted to do when I grow up, and I said I wanted to get married.
And what did he say?
He just laughed. But I was dying. I just couldn't reveal it. I was too afraid.
I have a piece of rather distantly related information.
Go ahead.
John said that St. John had played Jack Armstrong in his early days, and the person who wrote the script from Jack Armstrong came from our town, Oradown, New Jersey. He was J. That's trouble getting old, isn't it? Irving Crump wrote the script for Jack Armstrong. And unfortunately, we've never been able to find it. I've looked everywhere and cannot find any of those old scripts, but I would love to. They might even have St. John's name on it as the key actor, but that's way as far aside, but thank you for letting me tell you. I love being part of this organization.
John, great George. John, are you aware of those scripts at all?
No. I understand that most reports about the history of Jack Armstrong, All-American Boy, say that Don Amici was the first one. But actually it was St. John Terrell, but it was only broadcast in Chicago at the time. And but it was successful enough where they were able to get a national sponsor. I believe it was a cigarette company, and they poured more money into it and hired Don Amici to be the lead character.
Does anybody have any recollections of being in town where the talent was either staying at Lambertville House or elsewhere, or seeing them at a shop or anything like that? Walking around? Anybody?
I'll relate J.B. Klein's story that Stevie Wonder wanted to get a haircut before he played that night. And apparently, the barber shop was just for blacks. And he went in town. There was a black barber shop and I guess a white one. It's way before my time. And everybody crowded around and watched Stevie Wonder get that haircut. I don't know where the barber shop was.
It's probably on Franklin Street.
Yes.
On Franklin Street. Yeah.
I have a wild story. When Dom DeLuise was at the Music Circus in Music Man, it was customary, when the show closed, everyone would leave the theater around 11 o'clock, and we'd all gather at the Lambertville House. In the back room, the bar room, so the singers and dancers would go there, and people were allowed to drink, I believe, until maybe midnight or 1 o'clock. But the bars in New Hope were open an hour longer, and so everyone would leave the Lambertville House and go over to New Hope to the Canal House and drink. And I was underage. All I had was my driver's permit and a little Morris Minor. But I was absolutely enthralled with theater people and hung around them as much as possible. So we're kicked out of the Lambertville House because the bars closed. And Dom DeLuise says, let's all go over to the Canal House. And I said, oh, great, I'll drive. So a bunch of half-drunk chorus boys and girls pile, along with Dom DeLuise, pile into my little tiny Morris Minor. And there's one extra guy left over, Don North. And he's still carrying a drink. And as I pull away from the curb, he jumps on the front fender and lays on the front fender like a deer that's just been shot. And I'm taking it home. And we go up the approach to the bridge, and I get halfway across. We go up to the approach to the bridge, and there's the bridge cop. And Don lifts his drink and toasts the bridge cop. By the time we were halfway across the bridge, the police lights were behind us, and they pulled us over. And I gave him my permit, and he said, "Oh, so you're John Case, huh? Are you Elmer's son?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Okay, well, I'm going to let you off with a warning, but don't ever do that again."
That's a good one.
When we went, when we were leaving the theater, they had a station wagon. It was red, bright red, and it had their logo on it. And someone named Sven was the driver. And oh my God, he would come down 179 and cut off the old York Road there. And he was going on a tear. And it was just like, boom. It scared me every time. And one other thing about rehearsals, we rehearsed on a lot of times in the Oddfellows Hall in Lambertville, right there on Bridge Street. And we had the most marvelous time when Finian's Rainbow was playing, because the cast was so diverse and it was just a wild, wonderful, fun time. So
that's awesome.
That's it.
Somebody says, is the name Music Circus copywritten? Could it be revived? Well, that sounds like a business opportunity for whoever's quick on the draw out there.
I don't know. There's so many variations. You know, there's melody top, melody tent. You know, as more and more tent theaters sprang up in the 50s across the country, they all were variations of music circus.
Yeah, Music Fair. We had one on Long Island, Westbury
right.
Music Fair.
Goober, that was the Goober Gross one.
Yeah.
So somebody writes, my mother said many of the girls in the chorus stayed in people's homes because they couldn't afford a hotel room.
Well, there weren't enough hotel rooms in Lambertville. You know, it was the Lambertville house basically, and there was a motel over in New Hope. But you know, it was advantageous to both the people in the chorus. They got inexpensive lodging, and some of the people with larger houses got to rent out a room, and they a lot of them became friends.
John Doug DeWitt writes, nice trip down memory lane. Thank you. I left the area just after high school 50 years ago. FYI, Bart Terrell is on Facebook and is living in Naples, Florida. So,
did you know that St. John was married in St. John's Church? I believe that was his first marriage. And he was married in that beautiful church, our beautiful church on Bridge Street in Lambertville. And I was not invited to the wedding, but I did go and sit in the back of the church and watch that.
His first wife's name was Elrita.
Yes.
Elrita.
Yeah.
His mother's name, incidentally, was Rita, Reta. And she had a perfume company in Chicago when St. John was born. And she started out true to the times, you know, the roaring 20s. She started out making her perfume in her bathtub. But eventually it became very successful, and she made a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Wesley Brown asks, where did St. John live in later years? Of course, earlier you said he lived in the Wolverton Inn, what is now the Wolverton Inn in Stockton. That was his home initially. But in Ewing Township, where do you know whereabouts, John?
I don't know. So that's another tragedy in that St. John, you know, kept all the he kept memorabilia, the books, he kept everything from the music circus, and it was stored on a barn on his property, and there was a fire, and it was all lost. So there's so much information that we'll never have because of that tragic fire.
John, was that before he bought the Wolverton? There was another place he had out in the country, and he would hold parties there, and there was a swimming pool, and we would go to these parties. So is that where the barn might have been?
No, the barn was later, after the music circus closed.
Oh, okay.
That was in the 70s and 80s.
Okay. Yeah.
And 90s, because he died in 98.
Mm.
John Crail Funch says, John Case, what happened at the Canal House after that? So the question is, does that mean that specific evening after with Dom DeLuise, what happened at the Canal House, or is the question mean what happened at the Canal House after that?
Oh.
I suspect the former. How was the party with Dom DeLuise?
Oh, he was hysterical, you know, and this is before he was known. He was absolutely one of the funniest, you know, people I've ever met. You know, so this has to be about 1961, maybe 62, and things were a lot different then as far as alcohol goes. So after, I wish I could remember the bridge cop's name. Naylor, I think. Maybe it was Naylor. we just went on to the Canal House. And Johnny Francis was the owner of the Canal House. And his wife thought I was a cool kid for some reason. And she would, even though I was underage, she would serve me alcohol. And the Canal House was sort of like the Lambertville House, where theater people would gather after the shows. The Canal House, of course, was a more gathering place for people that were performing at the Bucks County Playhouse. And I do remember in 1963, Liza Minnelli was at the Bucks County Playhouse, and after the show, she was at the Canal House and got up and sang songs.
Mm.
Someone writes, where did St. John die and where is he buried? And by the way, before you answer, John, if you were to Google St. John Terrell obituary, you'll find like the New York Times published it, and there are others as well. But John, do you know where he is buried?
I do not, no. I'm more of a website developer than a historian.
Yeah. And also, if you're on the historian side, there's a website called findagrave.com. It is a resource for all cemeteries nationwide, and if you type in names and locations, you will find amazing things about relatives, because they don't just list where someone might be buried. If there were a record like a very short obituary, it will be on the website. It's free. It's called findagrave.com. And if you've never wanted to click around, you've never done a genealogy for your own self, I recommend it. Someone writes, my mother was a secretary at the Music Circus in the early 1950s. I saw and enjoyed many shows there. My brother Howard worked with Jim Hamilton on some of the sets. They were fun times. Yeah, amazing to have St. John and Jim Hamilton. These are people that, I mean, you knew them personally, but for us just to learn about them, these are larger than life figures. John, did you have anything else to add about working with Jim Hamilton?
I was only 8 years old. I just remember him coming to my father's shop and them talking about how they were going to build the sets.
I don't want to give away too much of the documentary, but in the film, Mr. Hamilton has a wonderful story about a donkey that I would encourage everyone to watch.
Hope it's rated G. Let's see.
No, don't go there.
Jim Stagnito wrote, I just wanted to say before I drop off, a heartfelt thank you to folks for organizing this. Inspiring, heartwarming. I'm glad you enjoyed that. Anybody else have any other memories or questions? Anything jogged? Any memories where you're like, oh yeah, I remember that?
Well, you mentioned Jim Hamilton. So the sets at the Music Circus, most of the times there was a new show every week. So the resident company during the day would be rehearsing the show for the following week. And the same thing, the sets would be being created one week for the following week. And sometimes on the more elaborate shows, things got very, very, very tight. And I do remember Jim Hamilton telling the story about how they were painting the scene, the scenery for the next scene while the show was going on. And they were telling the scene boys to be careful, the paint is still wet.
Now, was he building these in his on Mount Hope Street, in that right where Raritan Point is now?
No, that was later. Now, they had a little scene shop in the original location, out back, but it wasn't large enough to build all the sets. So they would do some of the sets behind the tent in the original location, and then my father would build some of the more elaborate pieces. When they moved up the highway, part of the property had a barn on it. Actually, it had a barn and a farmhouse. And so then they had plenty of room because they had a whole barn just dedicated to scenery.
From Sandy Brainerd, St. John was an expert on mushrooms and a very sneaky tennis player at our house.
We haven't mentioned yet, and I hope I say it properly, the Denthal carousel. That St. John had found one of the original carousels, and for the longest time had that on the second site. And some of the horses, I think, are still around. John, am I right?
Yeah, yes, yep. He tracked that down, and he found it was, I think he bought it in Coney Island. Again, it was the circus theme. And so, yeah, he bought it and had it restored. And that was one of my jobs working the scene shop, was touching up the paint on the horses.
Wesley Brown asks John, what happened to the sets when they were done?
They were thrown, well, some of them were kept. It would be determined after the show closed, would this be, could we recycle this somehow later in the season, alter it somehow. Most of them were, of course, very lightweight because they had to be carried down the aisle. And of course, they had to be basically see-through since it's theater in the round. So in the lower level of the barn were all the old sets that they thought they could possibly recycle somehow. The rest of it would be discarded.
Pamela Watkinson writes, every year in the spring, our church youth group would get the schedule for the summer concerts. And as a group, we would go to several shows each summer in the mid-60s. So that shows the planning. I'm surprised to read that the summer schedule is established in the spring, like that far ahead. Okay.
Actually, in the winter.
Wow. Yeah.
In the winter, and of course, there were a lot of groups. St. John promoted group sales, where he would sell bulk seats to various groups in the Delaware Valley.
Jim Mastrich wrote, thanks to all for this fantastic history. So glad you enjoyed it, Jim. Anybody, any other comments or who was it? I forgot who earlier was holding up the flyer. Was that Patricia? Was that you? What? Can you hold that up close? What is that exactly? Unmute yourself. So tell us what it is. Here, I'm going to unmute you. No, we can't hear you. You're gonna have to unmute yourself.
It's the playbill from the 1969 season, and it's really quite long, as you can see. It lists all the artists and they were musical artists. They were by that time it was just music. And then there was another year prior to that, and I don't know what year it was because it's not on here. But I was an usher there, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience.
And so is that playbill, was that distributed in town as like advertisements, or you got that playbill when you arrived as a paying customer for one of the shows?
I was an employee. I was an usher, and I got it at the music circus. I doubt that I would have gotten it beforehand because we lived in Ringo's, which was at the other side from Lambertville.
Yeah.
Mike, there was a whole system of flyers. They would be distributed. For instance, the Lambertville house had a little stand with Music Circus season programs. And so they were distributed to mostly, I guess, restaurants and hotels in the Delaware Valley. And Patricia, if you could contact me through the website and you're willing, I'd love to have those on the website.
Okay. Actually, I have photographs of them too.
Oh, wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful.
Dennis Hart, please show that photograph again. What are you showing us? And unmute yourself and tell us. Look at that.
This is my mother who's sitting here as sitting on one of the lions.
Oh,
I don't know if you could see.
yes. Fantastic.
Can I share one?
Yes, go ahead, Florence.
All right, now, let's see. I think Gary might have this on the documentary, but you can see the painted signs that Jim Hamilton probably did. And my husband and his mother and father and sister are in these photographs. And I never knew anything about them until I found them, after she died. And this is my husband behind the scenes with a, what do you call the electricians? The lighting. And that's my husband there. He's just a young kid. And his name is Jerry Moonen, by the way. A lot of people know Jerry Moonen. And here they are being, well, the cellar's empty. I don't know why these photographs were taken. They were professionally taken. And I don't know why his mother and father had them taken. And here they are in the dressing room with one of the actresses. And I don't know who the actress is or what show it was. It's a mystery. His mother never shared this with us, even knowing that I had been a kid that was in the shows. And so it was wonderful to find them. And maybe John Case would like to have copies of these. I don't know.
Boy, it's amazing
Oh,
what
yes.
high quality they are too.
They are. Let me give credit to the photographer. Please credit Baldwin Photo, 269 Lowell Avenue, Trenton, New Jersey. So that's.
Well, please contact John Case about that, Florence. Amala writes, tell us the website again. Amala, just Google Lambertville Music Circus. John's website is that if you were to Google Lambertville Music Circus, it's the top. Let's see. Anybody else have any comments or questions? I guess lastly, I would just say, John, I was struck by when I go through your website and again, reading articles in prominent publications, the press that was devoted to the to the music circus. It just shows what an important institution it was. Like what and how on the one hand, ahead of his time for, I mean, amphitheaters, outdoor theater in the round, as you mentioned, is not a new phenomenon. Yet he made it new somehow. Like here it comes again and brings these music fairs and circuses and tents, and all of a sudden they proliferate around the United States in the 50s and the 60s.
Well, yeah, St. John was a great promoter, and he had a wonderful press agent in New York, Max Eisen, who had been a press agent for theater for a long, long time, and they were masters at getting the word out.
Absolutely. So I mean, you look at the Crossing the Delaware, still a very popular event every Christmas, and then they even, it's so popular that they do a rehearsal the week earlier, and people attend that. That is a publicity event in its own right. I will say he appeared, St. John appeared to have failed at rehabilitating Richard III. I think most of us would still consider him a murderous hunchback, as per Shakespeare. But he would have disagreed with that assessment. Um, I think people are saying thank you, and we're just so happy to have you all here. So again, I think we're gonna close it. We'll say again, so you can contact John Case. John Case, has this archive of um, artifacts and memories on his website, and you could share them with him. We're going to transcribe some of these comments. We'll create a web page on the Lambertville Historical Society website, so there'll be a video of this. There'll be Sharon Bissaha's article from the year 2000 that I referenced earlier. There'll be, and then various memories that folks contribute. So we'll have a page there so that we can relive this. But what a fantastic place. That we all know Lambertville is a special place to live and work in, but here's one of the reasons what made it extra special. Like just a remarkable institution.
I just want to
have.
add
Go
that
ahead,
the
Gary.
reason I gave the documentary to the Historical Society is in hopes that if you do watch it, you'll make a donation of some sort to the Lambertville Historical Society.
We duly noted and duly appreciated, Gary. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you so much, folks. We're gonna wrap it up here, and feel free to, if you have any other related programs that you might want to see, maybe not the Music Circus, but other um, um, uh, activities or institutions from Lambertville, from the uh, from the past that you'd want to see us examine. We're happy to do that. So on that note, we'll sign off, and we'll say thank you all for attending, and we'll see you again soon, and stay safe. Take care.
Thank you.